Hi, Sarah. This is Dr. Andrew Miles, and I want to make a series for you on how to help with anxiety. Now, this isn't medical advice. We don't have a doctor-patient relationship. However, this is everything that I've learned over the last 20 years that I feel will be very, very beneficial for anybody with anxiety. Now, anxiety it's the national religion of the United States. It's the national religion of the West. It's the national religion of the modern world. Everything is set up. I'm not saying in a conspiracy kind of way, but just the conditions are such that it is very, very difficult not to live in a constant state of anxiety. And a lot of this is because our evolutionary past really benefited from anxiety. Anxiety is what made us think, is the baby gonna fall off a cliff, and go check on the baby. It made us check traps, check alarms to make sure that there weren't bears in the area. It got us anxious enough to go pace around and scout to look for danger. It's why we're all here today. Now, that being said, just because it's been so important for our existence, the way it controls us in the present is because aspects of our lives today are very different from our evolutionary past. However, if we can bring some of the aspects from that evolutionary past into the present in a way that makes sense, it can help to alleviate a lot of this anxiety. I'm speaking of anxiety in a very general sense. Now, what is it exactly? It's hard to pinpoint. It's like your car has a signal that says, check it out, something's wrong, right? That little light that comes out on your car. And it doesn't mean, well, when the car alarm thing comes on, it means you always need to check tire pressure. No, that's not the case. So what I'm gonna go over is, I've just written down in my notes, I have 20 different aspects that I'm gonna go over. And it's gonna be kind of like saying, do you have enough gasoline? It's gonna be sort of a series of checks and a series of tips and tricks that have worked for me and my patients, things that have worked over the past couple thousand years. Now, this is where my bias lies. If it has a system of tradition around it, has a strong tradition around it, so not some thing that's been going on the last 10 years, I'm talking about like 500 years of continuous use and is backed by science, that's where I say, you know what, that's probably a safe place to begin. So if that sounds fair enough, we can go ahead and begin. The first thing about anxiety is that when stressors come, we have our fight, flight, and freeze response. Fighting, you're not really supposed to bite people. I have toddlers, and I'm always telling them that we don't bite, don't hit. Part of the natural aggression that we as humans have, just as chimpanzees have, is that we'll get this kind of energetic response to hit people or to climb or to claw. And when that can't happen, then we get some tension trapped in our traps. We get a flight response as well. We can't, in an uncomfortable situation, just start running for 5-10 miles. Now, in our evolutionary past, maybe we see evidence of hungry wolves in the area. That might get us jogging in a certain direction for a couple of miles. Necessarily. Fight or flight responses would have us coming up trees or running away. The fighting and flighting would be just there. Another aspect of that is freeze. It's a response which helps us to hide. It cuts down on the breath. Now, in our modern society, where we're not allowed to claw people's eyes out, and we're not allowed to just start sprinting away from uncomfortable situations, although I'm sure many introverted people might prefer that as an option, what we do have the ability to do is freeze. And freezing looks like checking out. It looks like scrolling through social media. It looks like lying down on the couch when we don't really want to sleep, when we're not tired enough to sleep, but we want to lie down. That's a freeze response in many cases. So that freeze response it doesn't work out the anxiety, it doesn't work out the stress, but it allows it to internalize. When that doesn't go anywhere, then that tends to build up over time. As a result of that freeze response, our breathing becomes much more shallow. Now, this isn't the part where I say if you take big breaths and relax, it all goes away. That's overly simplistic. So what we're going to do is actually look at, first of all, how stress affects breathing, how we can not just reverse it, but go with some of those instincts, and then use that to identify as well what we might need to do to change with our breathing. Now, essentially, the body responds to stress in one of two ways. It will yawn. This is actually for all of the body's regulatory function. You've got yawning and sighing. So if you yawn, that's the way the body wants to bring blood to the interior, especially before sleep. Sighing is the way that we're going to let off steam. And steam in this case can be inflammatory nitric oxide. It can help us to gear down stress levels. So maybe people aren't always yawning or sighing, but you can tell by one, tone of voice. So if somebody has kind of an NPR tone of voice, so the way that, they're very soft spoken, but the breathing is coming from the diaphragm up, this is, their body desperately wants to breathe in and yawn. And this is a body, or this is a type that needs to take those fuller breaths. People who will say, okay, go to a yoga retreat, breathe deep and relax, this will benefit this type of person. There's another type of person though, and they sound more like, talk radio, and they're like, what is the problem? And you've got this kind of like, bah, 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 bah. And it's because the breathing pattern that people are speaking through is one where there's exhalation stronger than inhalation. And this is the way that we naturally deal with stress. We're very stressed out. Right? Now, when you're running, that is constantly happening. And so it's not the case that everybody who is stressed out, everybody who has anxiety needs to take deep, relaxing, filling breaths. For some people, this will actually make it worse. And for those types of people, this kind of actively sighing, even if it's gentle, just exhalation with more force than the inhalation. Yawns, breathing in, kind of holding it, letting it sink down. Sighing is the opposite. So what is the right way to breathe? The right way to breathe will depend on you. Now, if you just close your eyes and relax a little bit, you can observe your breath without controlling it and get a sense to whether you want to exhale a little stronger or inhale a little more. That's one way of doing it. You can ask your friends or family, do I tend to yawn more or sigh more? And it's which happens first, because there's a lot of people who they sigh and then they yawn right afterwards. But they don't yawn and then sigh afterwards. So the sighing itself is what is going to trigger the healing response. People who need to sigh more, often their anxiety tends to prevent them from getting to sleep. People who tend to yawn more, they oftentimes have insomnia where they wake up super early in the morning, middle of the night basically, and have trouble getting back to sleep. So these are two differences that you can look at. Along with that fight, flight, or freeze response, which we know we can kind of come out of with breathing. I say kind of because the more of these that you can do, obviously, the better. But if you have nothing else to change besides breathing, you can actually do quite a bit. You can adjust your but you can adjust your blood pH. You can adjust even bone density. If you're losing bone density, that can be adjusted by way of your breathing. Because, basic physiology there. has to do with carbon dioxide and how much you're blowing out versus maintaining in the blood. If, because of the freeze response, you know logically, all right, if I got out and exercised, or when I do yoga, I feel better, but I just can't bring myself to. That is perfectly normal and is understandable. Why? What we do is based on neurotransmitters. It's not based on just logic alone. We can logically know it's good for us, but the motive force that gets us out doing it is very hormonal. So I'm not going to ask you to fight against nature. I'm not going to ask you to fight against your own nature right now. But if you feel like, okay, I know moving and improving my physiology, improving my metabolism is going to be very beneficial, what I like to do, and this isn't appropriate for everybody, is go to a sauna and just sweat. And there's two kinds of sweat that you can kind of find. The first is the stinky sweat. You do the first 20 minutes, half hour, stinky sweat comes out. Then after that, you sweat again, drink water, sweat again, go in for another 20, 30 minutes. And the second sweat is salty sweat. Now that stinky sweat has to do with apocrine glands. It has to do with, it's kind of your hormonal stress sweat. So that's going out. It's no longer signaling to your body, hey, let's be stressed out. So if you can flush that out, amazing. That's great first step. Sweating itself is very, very important for our immune system, and our immune system plays an important role with our emotions. Now, sweating is one of the best healing, most healing things that you can do for most people. If you look at the Roman forts, one of the first things they built was actually sweat rooms, and they had that next to their hospital. So sweating was just incredibly important for them. If you look at sweat lodges, Finnish saunas, this was one of the most important aspects of health. The first category of herbal medicine in Chinese medicine are herbs which increase sweating. Now, to go back to our evolutionary past, there's a good reason for this. There is a theory with some pretty strong foundation that one of the ways that we as humans can hunt big animals, even without bows and arrows or really efficient spears, is that we can jog after them for days and we sweat, and our sweat cools us. Other animals can't efficiently cool themselves, so we can run an antelope down until it has a heart attack. There are hunters and gatherers to this day who hunt using this exact method. So based on the fact that we're relatively bald, some of us more than others, compared to chimpanzees, it is hypothesized that sweating was really our superpower as humans. So we've evolved to be sweating every day. Now, how much, if you're feeling exhausted, and that sounds ridiculous, how much is kind of the ideal amount to start with? To start with, if you can just feel a drop or two of sweat running down your spine, you're doing well. And this is going to help with water metabolism, water circulation, and it's going to help reduce a lot of inflammation that's trapped in the body by not sweating. So sweating, very, very important. In fact, I want you to think about it. When was the last time you had a really good workout to where you're sweating and afterwards you felt like you had anxiety? When was the last time you got out of a sauna and you thought, wow, I am really worried about a lot of things? It doesn't tend to happen. So the more you sweat, in my experience, the less anxiety that you have. If it's a case that the anxiety is preventing exercise, consider a sauna. If a sauna is out of reach, bundle up a little bit, get that drop of sweat going down the spine. You may feel tremendously better. Another very important aspect when it comes to anxiety has to do with the way our society as a whole functions and our brainwave patterns. So there are 5 brainwave patterns that you should know. There is delta, which is when you're in a dreamlike state. There's theta, which is kind of a daydreaming state. There is alpha, which is relaxed concentration. If you're going to shoot an arrow, that's alpha. If you're in a flow state, that's alpha. Most meditation is geared toward putting you into an alpha brainwave state. If you're fishing, you'll go between theta and alpha, just daydreaming and relaxed concentration. Beta is logical thought. And this is what we've been conditioned to be in from about first grade on. Before then, it's use your imagination, that's cool. But first and second grade, hey, what are you doing? Stop daydreaming, focus on the task at hand. We need to logically use our brains. So beta in society gets extremely overused. Now, what is that constant thinking, constant deduction, these constant thoughts, including scrolling through social media? It's beta dopamine, beta dopamine, beta dopamine. And this gets overdone. And when that's overdone, anxiety follows because the racing thoughts come. What about this? What about this? What about that? So what I like to do, this is a practice that I like, is so there's neurofeedback. You can look for a neurofeedback therapist. A lot of psychologists do this. They put electrodes on your head and they'll let you know what brainwave state you're in. What I find a lot of benefit from are actually binaural beats. So what that is it'll play one tone in one ear and another in the other ear. And when you can make it in your brain to where it sounds like it's one tone, then your brain waves are going to be approximately in that range. I find that tremendously useful to snap me out of beta wave states that are associated with anxiety. And I really use it as a tuning fork before meditation or Qigong exercises. As a daily practice, this is what I do. You may find it beneficial or not. You spend the first 5 minutes doing brain entrainment for delta. Then I go theta, alpha. I skip beta and I go directly to gamma. And that's my morning routine. And that's kind of takes you from low to higher and gets me in this relaxed focus for the day. At night, I do the opposite. I go gamma, then I skip beta, go to alpha, theta, and then delta, and that's right before I go to sleep. Take my ear things out, go to sleep. Very, very useful because I find it extremely difficult to maintain anxiety while I'm in a theta daydreaming state, or if I'm in an alpha relaxed state. I may logically know, yeah, those things are dangerous. Have I done what I can to take care of them? Yes. And then after that, I'm able to let go of it rather than obsessing over those same kind of thoughts that can contribute to feelings of anxiety. So this has to do with sort of unplugging the neural patterns that have existed and then rewiring them. Realistically, how long does this kind of practice take? If you're doing something which works for you, give it at least 2 weeks, because that's going to be the time required for those neural connections and the physical rewiring and the neurogenesis to take place in the brain. The full time, once you've got that 2-week momentum, you want to maintain imperfectly, but you maintain for about 3 months to get long-term cognitive changes so it doesn't swing back the next time something chaotic happens, which that is the nature of life in the universe. So expect the imperfect to be arriving. It will. And hey, that's what the anxiety says anyway, right? Hey, something bad's going to happen. Well, something unexpected will. And the more you can get your brain full spectrum and in a balanced state, the better poised you are to take care of it. And also, once you're feeling a little more full spectrum with how your brain works, once you're in a stronger state, it's less terrifying, right? Everything is scary if you're feeling weak. Stronger you get, less scary the world becomes. All right, logically, yeah, the world's a scary place. Yes, anxiety makes sense, especially based on our evolutionary past. I'm not going to argue about the logic of it. Logic is sound. The emotions that go around that and how they affect our physiology is something that in the interest of thriving and surviving and all of that, it's in our interest to balance that as well as we can. So the next point I want to bring up is media. Now, I didn't open with this one because if you're working on breathing first, understanding the fight, flight, and freeze, this becomes much easier. A lot of people say, avoid social media, avoid social media. And I've been in states where I'm in a state of anxiety and I know logically I shouldn't be looking at social media before I go to sleep. And what? I'm in a freeze response. It's very difficult to override what's happening at a neuroendocrine level with logic. So what I'm going to say, just understand it, but also the way out of it is generally more through the brain entrainment, through sweating, through breathing exercises that are appropriate for you. That makes it to where social media is not interesting anyway. But that said, social media today is not social media a year ago. It's not social media 2 years ago. It is crack cocaine for the brain because now it's powered by artificial intelligence. And I know, I utilize platforms like YouTube and TikTok in order to reach people. I utilize Facebook, I utilize whatever I can to reach people because how else am I going to? But one of the reasons I like to put some of the better in-depth content through email directly is to set a precedence, right? One of the ways that I get off of passive media is, for instance, I like history, and I really love the History on Fire podcast. So if I'm a Patreon supporter of a podcast that I really enjoy or something like that, I can get it sent directly to my email. I can open the email purposefully during a certain time of day. I can download what I want to listen to and schedule out for when I'm going to listen to it. And then that makes it less reactive. And the less reactive it is, the more in control you can be of your time, of your breath, and everything else. So there's everything that you could possibly want to know, and AI to know exactly what you want to know before you know it. And it's just too much of a good thing. So it's important to take a step back and be a little bit Amish about this and just say, okay, how am I going to intentionally use this without being used by it? Because it will eat up your health. It will eat up your concentration. It's designed to give you anxiety and then sell you stuff. That's how it works. That's why the ads work so well. It's designed to do that. So how do you make it not work? If you're engaging in breathing exercises, you can completely detach from that. Working on the brain entrainment, working on meditation, mastering those neural states, having a good sweat. You have a good sweat, social media before or TikTok before I have a sweat, go to a sauna. It's very interesting. Afterwards, I could not care less. And that's what I want to offer to you. The feeling of I couldn't care less about whatever the anxiety is telling me. And social media mimics anxiety. It amplifies anxiety. So we'll just understand that. We know logically that anxiety comes from two sources, the past and the future. And this is the part where I say, live in the present, and it's so happy and it's so nice. So first of all, again, that's logical, that's nice, but what do you replace it with? One nice exercise that I like is take a drink of water, swallow. If you're eating, same thing. Feel it all the way through. Engage your five senses. Appreciate the colors around you. Marcus Aurelius said, as a boar is attacking you, to appreciate the light glistening off of the drool, before it mauls you to death. But in that moment, not to succumb to anxiety, but to enjoy those seconds before. So to root ourselves in touch, in scent, in what we can see and what we can feel in our body, and see how can we relax ourselves into a state of joy and happiness. it's not about don't think about the past, don't think about the future, or use your five senses to ground yourself in the present. What is the allure of the past and the future? Generally because the present sucks. We want to be somewhere else. Social media is an escape. The past, worrying about the past, obsessing about the future, these are all pleasant escapes. No judgment, obviously, right? And the present seems to suck, especially if we're comparing what's out there. We look at business TikTok, business whatever, and it's like, so-and-so went on to make $5 billion in his first year, just helping people out, just doing recycling or something wonderful. And first of all, a lot of those stories aren't true in the way that they're presented. Second of all, there's billions of people in this world. To compare yourself with any one of those billions of people, it's weird. In an evolutionary point of view, you compare yourself traditionally with the 100 people or 150 people you've ever met in your life. That's like your village. Maybe you go to some kind of like intertribal powwow or some some sort of like central temple area where people are worshiping. Maybe you'll meet 1,500 in your lifetime. The stakes are a lot lower, realistically, right? There are genetic freaks, there are freaks of chance and circumstance that become very successful. And that is what you're pitted up against. You get all of these stories of these exceptional people, and that's what you're comparing yourself to. Yes, it's good to aim high, but how could that not increase your anxiety? How could you not feel like, oh, geez, I'm not a billionaire, what's wrong? Or they say most Americans are temporarily embarrassed millionaires. I would say billion at this point, since, $1 million will get you a shack in Los Angeles. And that's anxiety provoking. Our money is degrading through the inflation. There's all sorts of corruption. What political tribe do you belong to that's going to save America? It's pretty understandable at this stage to be disillusioned, if you haven't been for years, to be jaded. And all of that, if you're looking to your society, to the leaders in your society, and you're feeling jaded and you're feeling disappointed, how is that not going to increase anxiety until you unplug from that and plug into your actual family and friends who are your true tribe? As long as your attention is outside of your circle of control, out of your circle of influence even, that's pure anxiety. But if you can focus on what it is that you absolutely can control and shun completely what is outside of your control, you return yourself to a position of power where anxiety can't affect you. There's another source of anxiety that I'll mention, and that is posture. So at the very start of this, I mentioned how anxiety can be the light saying, hey, something's wrong, like the light in your car dashboard that says, hey, check engine. Posture can also affect anxiety. If you're walking and every time you take a step it hurts, even at a subconscious level, it'll increase anxiety. If you're breathing and if you're like this all the time, as we all are, then just that will make your breathing shallow, as though you're in a freeze posture. That'll increase anxiety. Literally just text neck will make you anxious. Learning how to bring your shoulders back, breathe yourself into good posture, you'll start to feel, oh, I've got this sore spot in my back first. It's hard to actually sit up straight. Yeah, that was the part causing you anxiety. That could happen with knees, everything else. So some light stretching, some Qigong exercises, very, very useful. If you want a great one-on-one Qigong teacher, I'd look up Fabrice Pichet, or contact me and I'll put you in contact with him. He has a background in osteopathy and very gentle breathing and movement. His student as well. So, whatever I can do to help you with that, just let me know. Oh, we got media. Oh, so one nice exercise is to take a nice walk in, like on a nature trail or something. Bring a buddy, because if you feel anxious walking alone, you should. Ever hear of Little Red Riding Hood? Yeah, buddy system is good. It also reduces anxiety to be with somebody. When you're walking and the act of walking, you naturally will look to the right and left of the trail. When you find that there aren't any predators or bad guys on that trail, it lowers anxiety. It drops that feeling. One exercise to mimic this is eye movement training. A lot of therapists use this, and basically you close your eyes and look to the right and left a lot. After a few minutes of that, people can find it's very relaxing. Now, in a similar vein, there are exercises from East Asia. In Taiwan, I learned this particular exercise where you take a deep breath in, turn to the left as you exhale, take a breath in, turn to the right as you exhale. Now, yes, this is relaxing, but when I turn to the right and left, I'm getting 365 degrees of 360 degrees of vision, right? So I know there's no bad guys behind me. That's relaxing. That brings me to feng shui, or tidy up. If you see clutter and you think in your mind, I've got to do that, that's something I've got to do, that is an anxiety worm that will gnaw at you until it's done. Even if you check out and go, well, I'm just going to ignore it and be on social media, what you've done is you've just taken what is in your control and you've thrown your attention to what is outside of your control. So you can use cleaning as tidying up as a meditation. So usually you'll say, like, follow the breath, breathe in, push your hands out, breathe in as the hands come out. You can do the same thing with, breathe out, pick up the junk mail, breathe in as it comes in, breathe out as you throw it away, or deal with it as you want to. You don't have to clean in a frenzy, you don't have to clean with music. You can do a very gentle cleaning as a mental and spiritual practice, and that can lower anxiety. Prayer, very important for alleviating anxiety. And this is generally done, I mentioned brainwaves. Prayer will often bring us into gamma wave states. Studies on Tibetan meditators, priests who are praying, that will bring people into this gamma wave state. A practice that I do is I alternate between prayer and reflecting on my dreams. And I try to bring those two together. And in doing so, it's the full spectrum from completely awake to completely asleep. And in your dreams, there are messages, maybe from the body, maybe subconscious, whatever, that are trying to talk to you and tell you. And then in a prayer state, there's a lot of wisdom that people attribute from being in that state. Now, if I seem a little hesitant with my words, it's because I'm not trying to ascribe a religion or religious practice that you should or shouldn't engage in. What I'm saying is that most human societies have had prayer and have also been reflective of their dreams. And there seems to be some benefit in that. And I personally find deep benefit in reflecting between my dream state and prayer state, and seeing that almost as two parts of a battery. When I'm reflective on those states and working on integrating them, anxiety completely vanishes for me. I don't know if that'll be the case for you, but I think it's worth exploring. Another idea, and this is a big source of anxiety for a lot of people, is that if we have ideas based on culture or other thought subscriptions that don't match our present reality, it's a source of anxiety. It's a source of distress. Now, I'm not talking about absolute truth or anything like that, but sometimes what was true 2 years ago, what was true 10 years ago, isn't conditionally true now, any more than in winter, it was true that I would go outside and get cold. But in summer, it's not true that if I go outside and wear a parka, I'm going to feel good. In fact, I might feel miserable. The same can be said about beliefs that we pick up, beliefs that we form, which are very accurate for a condition, for a time or a place, but no longer serve us in the present. That can be a source of anxiety. So rather than avoiding anxiety, sometimes looking into it and asking, what is this anxiety about? And maybe it goes to a certain person's behavior or how you're reacting to that behavior. And then you may find, at least I do, that's often linked to a personal belief. And when I explore that belief, I think, that's a very true, useful belief to have in this other context. But for me right now, to use that on autopilot is just a source of anxiety. So I put it away and retire it in that condition, in that context. Maybe I'll tell you a huge one that I've had. I've been raised in the West with a fundamental belief in equality, right? Now, the ideal that we should all have equal opportunity, I hold fast to that. I think that's a beautiful ideal. I don't think people should be held back by conditions of their birth. I think that's a savage thing. However, the flip side to that is we cannot put forth expectations onto everybody for behavior or for, we just can't expect everybody to know what we know. We can't expect everybody to hold the same assumptions. We can't expect everybody to perform in the ways that we do. Like what we do at our best, we can't hold other people to be at that level with what we do best. That's obviously not fair. They may be exceptional at something that we're not good at. But the shadow or negative side of that fundamental belief in equality isn't just the equality of opportunity, it's the idea that if I can do it, they can do it. If they can do it, I can do it. Huge source of anxiety. Huge source of anxiety. Because one, if they can make $10 million in a month, why can't I? Well, that causes anxiety. And then the other is, why can't they look where they're going while they're driving? Why do they keep bumping into people? Obviously, some of these, there's rational reasons to be upset with people, but if you hold the expectations high for other people, higher than what their capacity is, just a recipe for anxiety, a recipe for dissatisfaction, right? So that's been one for me. Looking at the world as unfair. When I was little, my mom would say, well, life is unfair. And that's true, we all know that, but then there's still this hope, right? There's this expectation that life is fair, and when it's not, when we find ourselves on the wrong side of hierarchy, that can be a huge source of anxiety, especially if we imagine ourselves to be part of an extended culture that includes celebrities we've never met. If that's part of our extended hierarchy, then we're firmly at the bottom. But when we put our attention back on what's real, our friends, family, our actual community, we find that we exist in a conditional hierarchy where we have something that we can do that we serve people with, where we have relatively high status, and we have areas where we are helped with, where we have relatively lower status, and that's okay, because it's actually what we're part of. It's actually what's feeding us as part of that community. Car culture. Societies where you have to have an automobile to get around have higher ratings of stress and anxiety than those who don't. Getting yourself in a metal cage and driving fast enough to kill you Weird. Why would that cause anxiety? Then getting those stress hormones and not being able to fight or flee. You can't run in the car. You're stuck there, you're seated. Every time you get that feeling in your stomach driving in traffic, that was run 3 miles. That was the energy to run 3 miles, and instead it's just internalized with anxiety. So it's a car culture. What do you want to do? Well, look for, especially as technology has improved, look for ways, if you can get your groceries delivered, look for ways to cut down on the amount of driving that you personally need to do. That alone can help improve anxiety quite significantly. And just understanding, being in a car, driving everywhere, doesn't matter if you grew up with it. Doesn't matter if those are your earliest memories. I mean, I grew up in the United States. Sure, earliest memories are, being with my cousins in a car. Yeah, just because it's normal to us doesn't mean it's normal for our evolutionary biology. It's still weird, it's still scary as all get out. So if you're in a car, make sure that you're exercising regularly, doing those other things to work it out of your system. If you can reduce the amount of time you're on the road, all the better. Remember, none of these are cure-alls, these are all just contributing factors. And if you can take some of these into consideration, you can massively reduce your anxiety and the perceptions you have around that. In Chorus capsules, there's an herb called Poria. It is anti-anxiolytic, means it's anti-anxiety. Working with your gut microbiota can be very important for reducing anxiety. I came back from China. I wasn't used to eating sugar. I'd been living there for years. There just wasn't sugar in anything where we were. I just had normal American food, and I had tremendous anxiety. I didn't know what was happening. Then I took some Chorus and it cleared right up, and I realized, geez, it was the spikes in blood sugar because of all of the sugar that's hidden in everything. So gut microbiota plays a crucial role. Now, if you're taking Chorus capsules and you find like, oh, I feel like sleeping all the time. Why is that? Somebody else takes Chorus capsules and they talk about how much energy they have. Well, it's regulating gut microbiota, right? So the person who was sluggish and held down by their microbiota gets that regulated, they have all this energy. Somebody else is living on stress energy, sound familiar? And then you regulate that so the stress hormones aren't amped, come off of that stress energy, suddenly feel like sleeping. That's good, that's a good thing. That's the body going into a healing state. And the last aspect that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to leave you with a story that absolutely is a true story that changed my life. So first is that I've mentioned before, we live in this society that worships, billionaires, and everything is like so status driven around, like what kind of car you drive, all of this that's just inherent in really all societies, but it's on hyperdrive when you're comparing yourself with everybody on earth. But there's a way that you can actually use your anxiety to transform your life and make it really beautiful. I was at a banquet table in Chengdu. Actually, it's not exactly true. I was in the Chengdu area, but I was in a city outside of Chengdu. Now, in this city, I was at this banquet table. And the way that it works is whoever's the head honcho has his back to the wall. I was on the opposite side. I was not the head honcho. I was lucky to be in the room. Very lucky to be in the room. This man was very important, very powerful, very wealthy, and influential, extremely influential. In fact, his influence is how he got to his position. And somebody was telling me the story of his life, and he heard them talking about it, and then he took over the story, and everybody was dead silent when he spoke. 20 years before, he was a rickshaw driver. Now, it was like a bicycle with a rickshaw behind it in rural China. he had a third grade education. His son needed a surgery that he couldn't afford. And he was panicking because the land that was given to him by the government was garbage. He couldn't farm it. So he started to be a rickshaw driver when nobody had any money. There were very few people who even had any excess of money. But he took that up. And he was absolutely panicking. He couldn't sleep due to his anxiety. Now, it was after the Cultural Revolution and the Buddhist temples had just opened up again. And he went to this Buddhist monk and said, I have this anxiety, I can't function. My son needs this surgery and I can't provide for him and he might die. And the monk said, are you the only person in the world with a son? He said, no. He said, are you the only person who will die? Is your son the only person who will die? He said, no. What is this? This sucks. This interaction is terrible. What's going on? He said, I'm going to tell you a way to alleviate your anxiety forever. And it will change your life. And he said, okay, let's hear it. He said, the troubles that you have are real. I'm not going to deny that they are not troublesome. But they filled your heart. So what you're going to do instead is you're going to replace other people's wants and needs with your own. So you're going to hold that space in your heart. To do this, I want you to be able to say the names of 100 people and what they want and need. And hold that as a memorization. Don't chant the beads saying, Omi Dolfo. Don't do the other chants. Your chant is your community. So, this man was riding his rickshaw, and the guy behind him, he took him back from a bar, and this guy was trying to do some sort of business, meeting with people to drink and do some business. But he couldn't get sand that was cheap enough for this project. Everybody wanted too much sand. So the rickshaw driver said, okay, his name is Mr. Wu. I'm putting him in my heart. He needs sand. I'm not going to think about my son. This man needs sand. Now, a few weeks later, a guy was complaining, saying, oh God, I've got this terrible farmland. He's like, yeah, tell me about it. My land isn't fertile. And this guy said, all I've got is sand. And I tried to dig down. It's just sand all the way down. So he has an idea. He invites both of these guys out to dinner. Dinner he can barely afford. He introduces them. Here, this man has sand, nothing but sand. You need sand. He sells it to them for pennies on the dollar or the yuan of what the other guy wanted. So suddenly, a guy with nothing suddenly has more money than he thought he would have. And then this other guy has sand. And the rickshaw driver out of this got nothing. In fact, he just spent money on dinner for them. So he gets home and his wife finds out what's happened. And she beats him badly. In fact, she took out a fruit knife and was threatening to cut him with it if he ever did something so stupid again. Well, he did this again, and he grew his list in his heart to 100 people. And by and by, what happened was people were afraid not to include him in contracts because of everybody he was connecting. As a result of this, he became extremely wealthy. And he told me, I have barely a third grade education. I've tried to be a manager, I can't. I've tried to be a leader, I can't do that either. I have only one skill in this life, and that is, I can remember 10,000 people at a time. I can remember their names, I can remember their phone number, and I can remember what they need. Now, I have no idea how this guy did it. Maybe he had some form of autism, some kind of savant thing, I don't know. But what I do know is that he put all of his energy into that. As a result, his son was able to get the surgery. As a result, his life changed. Now, that practice of putting other people's needs and wants in your heart to replace the anxiety, comparing yourself not with those social media stars, not with the people on television who are so snazzy, but instead just not even comparing yourself, just looking at those you actually love, your friends, your family, looking at what their wants and needs are and seeing if you can connect the dots. That's one of the most powerful tools you can have for anxiety, and it's the most powerful tool that you can have for accelerating your quality of life, not just in terms of wealth, but in terms of becoming the most important person to all of those people who you actually care about, actually love, and letting that extend outward to enhance your life. Thanks so much for listening. I truly, truly hope that even some of this can greatly enhance your life. That would mean the world to me, because when I hear that you have anxiety, that goes in my heart. And I want you to have a beautiful life.